Obviously, this season hasn't been everything Notre Dame fans hoped it would be, but the Irish can still build momentum heading into next season, starting with a win on Senior Day against Wake Forest. That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, and welcome to Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Thursday, November 16th, and thanks for making this your first listen of the day. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer covering college football for Fox Sports. And this episode of Locked On Irish is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Really excited for this one because we have a new guest on the show. I had the chance to talk with Ryan Roberts from Irish Breakdown. He also does work for Rise and Draft Scouting, plus a whole bunch of other outlets. So it was cool to have him on to preview Notre Dame's upcoming matchup against Wake Forest. We also get into the biggest issues plaguing Notre Dame's offense right now and some draft stuff at the end. By the way, if you want to be featured on tomorrow's mailbag episode, please drop your questions in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or you can send them in on Twitter at LockedOnIrish or on Instagram at LockedOnIrishPod. It's been a busy week on the show. If you're just tuning in, we had Notre Dame men's basketball beat writer Tom Noy on Monday's episode to preview the season. Then we had Luke Smith on for our regular Tuesday conversation. On Wednesday, we talked some recruiting with recruiting insider Brian Smith. And now we have Ryan, so let's bring him in. All right, I'm here with Ryan Roberts from Irish Breakdown, and I'm pumped about this one because Ryan is actually a former host of Locked On Irish. So welcome back to the show, man. How does it feel?
Feels very strange, to be honest, man. It's like I know when you go on like Apple Podcasts and stuff, you can see like past reviews. It's like a timeline of sorts, right? You're just like looking back and be like, that one was me. The good things that they said there, that was me. And then if it says any negative stuff, you can keep that stuff to yourself. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's weird, man. We only did it. I always tell the Locked On guys, because I go on like Locked On Buckeyes all the time because I'm good friends with Jay Stevens, and it's just like, I loved my time at Locked On, but you have to be a grinder. You have to be a grinder. So,
yeah, I got to say, doing the daily stuff is hard, man. But we've made it through this far. We're in week 12 of the season, and hell, Notre Dame started in week 0. But it's funny you mentioned Jay. Jay and I did a crossover episode before the Ohio State game. It was a lot of fun. He actually predicted Notre Dame would win that game.
Wow.
Obviously, it did not work out.
I did a lot of draft stuff with him in the preseason, so I feel like I may have gotten in his head that like that might happen. So I might have to take blame for that one. And I mean, should have won the game, but it's another conversation for another day.
Yeah, we don't need to rehash that. I'm sure we'll do plenty of that in the offseason and probably for the months and years to come, because that one was just it was the one that got away. But Notre Dame has their final home game coming up on Saturday, believe it or not, against Wake Forest. And obviously, there's not a ton of national buzz around this game, but there's still some pretty compelling storylines in this one, most notably Notre Dame quarterback Sam Hartman facing off against his former team. What's your perspective on this matchup as we sit here today?
I mean, it definitely doesn't have the luster that we thought it might have, right? Before the season, I think you're talking about Notre Dame with potential playoff hopes, and this might be the final 2-game stretch of Wake Forest and Stanford to cement a potential playoff resume, right? And then you also talk about the Sam Hartman layer of things, him throwing for 110 career touchdowns and over 12,000 yards during his Wake Forest career, and a little bit of a revenge game, I guess, even though they didn't leave on bad terms. But I mean, there's a lot of cool storylines, but with how Hartman's been playing the last couple games on top of Wake Forest not being a very good football team, it's lost its luster. It definitely has. I still think that there is some momentum that Notre Dame can gain from this, right? I mean, because like at the end of the day, if Notre Dame goes 9-3 and let's say they win their bowl game, they end up going 10-3, it's not a good season still, right? Like it was still a season of underperformances in certain instances, but you can still salvage a little bit of momentum going into the offseason. You can still do a couple firsts, the first 10-win season under Marcus Freeman, and you start building off of that, and you got a really good 2024 recruiting class coming in, and some things are still in the works there, but this game has definitely lost its luster compared to what we thought it could be in the preseason.
Yeah, I look at this game as like, well, if they win comfortably, it's more of like a sigh of relief. I'm a little bit nervous, to be honest with you. I feel like if the game is tight in the fourth quarter, we're all going to be sweating, and those will not be fun conversations to have after the game. But right now, Notre Dame is favored by 24.5, so Vegas clearly doesn't think that this one is going to be that close. You mentioned Notre Dame could gain some serious momentum from winning this game, winning out, really. How much of an impact do you think that really is going to have on next season and beyond? Because I think Notre Dame's going to lose a lot of guys, a lot of younger guys, players that Marcus Freeman recruited in his first couple classes. Head coach, they'll have more opportunities next year. But how much of an impact do you think these next 3 games will have going forward on the program?
I mean, I think you still, because the thing for me, Tyler, is like next year's team is going to be really young and inexperienced regardless, right? Like you're going to lose the majority of your defense. You're going to be bringing in a lot of new guys. You're going to have a new starting quarterback, whether that is someone that's in the pipeline, whether that's someone that you're going to bring in as a grad transfer. Your wide receivers are going to get a year older, but you're playing a lot of freshmen already, right? The Jaden Greathouses of the world, the Rico Floreses of the world. So you're going to be young all over the place. You're going to have to replace Joe Alt more often, more likely than not. So you're going to be a really young team. I think that the thing that we need to understand, though, about momentum into the offseason, it can be really overrated, but I think it could be a little bit understated for what is a young football team next year, right? Like keeping a good taste in a bunch of players' mouths going into the offseason, going into next year. Because at the end of the day, the Jaden Greathouses of the world, the 2023 class, the 2024 class coming in, even the 2022 class, which was obviously a really good one as well with the Jalen Sneeds of the world, the Joshua Burnhams, like that group, they still are looking for firsts at Notre Dame being such young guys, right? And they have not really tasted a lot of success yet. You go 9-4 the first year. Yes, you win a bowl game, but you struggled, right? Like we know that the struggles that they had in 2022. I think to end the season off the right way, you can still gain a lot of belief, deeper belief in what Marcus Freeman is building. Because we know he talks about, all the cliches that we hear, the 4 for 40 and to set yourself up, but it's also about
the better.
bumpy road the better, next play is the best play. Like, all of his stuff that his cliches that he throws out there. But if you do look at it in a holistic approach of, hey, it's a slight improvement. Next year, you keep building, and you keep these young guys energized. I do think there's a lot of momentum to be gained. I do. So it's going to be a young team next year. But I think if you win the last 2 regular season games and you win a bowl game and you enter the year, 10 wins, and you're probably not going to be ranked super high next year to begin the year because you're such a young team, but you're still feeling good about yourself entering what is going to be a really big year for Marcus Freeman, obviously year 3.
Yeah, year 3 for Notre Dame coaches is always like one of the most pivotal years of their entire coaching career. And for Notre Dame, the future is going to be impacted greatly by how Notre Dame finishes this season, but also for the seniors and the veterans on this team. Like they want to finish strong. Obviously, this season didn't really go as planned, but they still want to go out on a high note, especially in Notre Dame Stadium. So this is a very important game for them, even if it's not as important nationally. So which matchups in this one are you most excited to watch?
I mean, I think on paper, the defense has the biggest advantage against this Wake Forest offense, like I really do. Cause I mean, we know the headlines, right? Like I'm sure you talk about it every single day on this podcast. I know that we have been talking about it every single day on the podcast. The Notre Dame offense is struggling right now, man. Like it is against the better teams on their schedule. They just have not been able to put together consistency. They just haven't been able to do it. And you're coming off a Clemson game where the offense was awful. But for the most part, the consistency, the sustainability of this team has been all year is defense is pretty good. Like it's good. It's a really good unit under Al Golden. They've showed up in the biggest games for the most part. They've played their butts off. They have a lot of really impact players, the Benjamin Morrisons of the world. Xavier Watts leads all of college football in interceptions. Howard Cross has been playing out of his mind the majority of the year. Riley Mills has shown a lot of flashes. So I think the Notre Dame defense, I mean, if we're talking about matchups, they have to win this battle against Wake Forest because they're playing against an offense that is not very good, right? Like it's just not a good offense overall. So I think that you have to feel good as a Notre Dame fan, a supporter, an alumni, whatever. You have to feel good about Notre Dame's matchup defensively against the Wake Forest offense because that is the one that I think is the biggest separator in this game.
Yeah, I see your point there. And for Notre Dame on offense, they have struggled at times this season, but usually against some really good defenses. Now, I'm not excusing them of all their struggles in the past, but usually when they're playing teams with weaker defenses, they're able to put up points. Now, if they're not able to put up points at Wake Forest, I think that would be a big-time concern because Wake Forest is a pretty good defense. They're definitely better on defense than they are on offense. They're only giving up 24.4 points per game, but they're also giving up like 5.7 yards per play, so they're certainly vulnerable. We'll be right back with Ryan to talk more about Notre Dame's upcoming matchup against Wake Forest. But before we get into that, I want to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. I used LinkedIn Jobs a couple years ago, and they made it easy to contact the hiring manager, learn more about the role, and eventually, I got the job. LinkedIn also makes it incredibly easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. All you have to do is add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. We all know hiring people can be time-consuming, but adding the right team member can be invaluable to your business, and LinkedIn Jobs makes it easier than ever. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Now time for your Game Changer of the Week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. Xavier Watts has been Notre Dame's biggest game changer as of late, and he now leads the country with 7 interceptions, so he's my Game Changer of the Week. Much like Xavier Watts has done for the Notre Dame defense, Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. They're full of flavor and well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Specifically for Notre Dame on offense, what do you think that they need to do to have success in this one?
They need to figure out how to create some plays outside of the numbers into the perimeter. They have to be able to do it. Because for me, like, this game's about trying to find sustainability, right? I mean, there is a reality, Tyler, in my opinion, where Notre Dame could roll the ball out and run the ball a million times and just bludgeon this team because you have more talent in the trenches than what Wake Forest has. They have a really good defensive end in Jasheen Davis, but for the most part, you outman them up front by a pretty large margin. You have a bulldozer of a running back, obviously, Audric Estime, and then we know the depth that they have behind him when they choose to use the Jeremiah Loves, the Jadarian Prices of the world. So they should be able to run the football in Wake Forest. There's no doubt. But if they just go that route and just bludgeon this team with the run game and don't really, to try to fix some of the inconsistencies that they have had as an offense, do you really feel great coming out of this game? I mean, there's a reality, honestly, in my opinion, where you beat this team like 34-14, but did you get better this game, right? Like, did you get any better? I don't know if you can definitely answer that. So I want to see, are you able to create some explosives outside the numbers? Can anyone that you throw into the boundary win? Can any of them do it? Because it hasn't been a consistent. I mean, obviously, Deion Colsey goes down early. Tobias Merriweather on the outside. He's been playing more of the field position, but he's been inconsistent. Jaden Greathouse has been dealing, obviously, with the hamstring issues, and he isn't really like a real true boundary receiver right now. So you've really struggled to win outside the numbers. You struggled to consistently win on the perimeter. And for me, it's like you have a Wake Forest defense that has a pretty decent secondary as far as NFLers in the back end. Kalen Carson's a very good player. I guarantee he's going to be in the Senior Bowl this year. Malik Mustafa at safety is a good football player as well. Notre Dame has to create some explosives in this passing game, but more than anything on the outside. I know that Chris Tyree is going to be able to hit the middle of the seam and be able to create some plays. I'm sure that the tight ends will have their mismatches. I'm sure running backs, if they choose to use them, will have mismatches in the running game as well. But what has been the biggest inconsistency for this offense, for the most part, it's been their ability to win outside the numbers, to create explosive plays in the passing game against, the better teams on the schedule. And while you were correct, Wake Forest is not one of the better teams on the schedule. It's still about creating sustainability for me. And if I want to feel good about this team going into the offseason and into 2024, I got to know that a couple of these wide receivers are starting to showcase their talent level and to play to it. Because I think the biggest misconception around this program or people that cover it, or even from a national perspective, is Notre Dame doesn't have talent at wide receiver. And I don't think that's true. I look at Tobias Merriweather and I'm like, that kid has all the talent in the world. He hasn't been developed for whatever reason, right? Like there's talent there, but Notre Dame has not been able to consistently win outside at wide receiver and at wide receiver in general. I want to see them be able to do that, because if they're able to do that and they loosen this box up, because Wake Forest is going to say, dude, you guys are not running the football on us today. You're going to have to create some plays outside the numbers. You're going to have to create some players working to the perimeter. And if they're able to make those plays, then they're going to roll this team. And it's going to be embarrassing probably at the end for Wake, all due respect. But that's just been the most inconsistent part of Notre Dame's game offensively, in my opinion. And if they're able to show that, then you start feeling a little bit better working down the stretch and into the offseason.
Yeah, what do you attribute those struggles to on the outside? Because I think there's a bunch of different ways to look at it. One, I think we all, and I'm including myself in this, underestimated just how big of an impact the injuries would have on Notre Dame's wide receivers. You mentioned Jaden Thomas. He went down in the Ohio State game. He has not been the same since. That is wide receiver number one for Notre Dame. That is a huge loss. Deion Colzie, even though he wasn't a starter, that's a big piece of the rotation, gone. Matt Salerno, he was out after the first game, and I know he was probably like the 6th or 7th guy. That's still another guy in the rotation, and all of a sudden, his impact, or his absence, rather, is magnified when you lose all these other guys. So I think that plays a part into it. I think that schematically there has been some stuff where like maybe the receivers aren't being put in the best position to succeed. Now, I'm not putting all of that on Jared Parker like some people are. I don't think it's all on him. I also think that they're playing true freshman wide receiver a lot of the time. Hell, in the final drive against Clemson, they had Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, and Jordan Faison. That's 3 freshman wide receivers. So they're asking a lot of these guys. But yep. I am a little bit disappointed in the development or lack thereof of Rico and Jaden, because like you look at them at the beginning of the season, specifically Greathouse, he couldn't have had a better debut for Notre Dame. He has 2 touchdowns right away, and then he hasn't really developed as the season has gone along. You could make the case that he's regressed, but he was hurt. So there's a bunch of different issues going on the outside. What do you think is the most glaring one that Notre Dame could at least try and fix against Wake Forest?
Well, I think it's the key thing is that you are open, and I think more people need to be open to the fact that it's a combination of things, right? It really is. I mean, wide receiver position needs to be developed better. There's no doubt about it. But you mentioned already, basically half of the wide receiver group was out at some point with hamstring issues. I mean, Jaden Thomas has been dealing with a hamstring issue that has now plagued him for a couple months now, right? Like Jaden Greathouse has not been the same guy since he got back from his hamstring. Even Chris Tyree, who's been arguably your most consistent wide receiver, has been dealing with hamstring issues throughout a part of the season as well. So hamstring issues have been a big thing. I also think that there needs to be an influx of creativity in the passing game. I think that that's something that needs to take a step forward here. Ultimately, if you're asking me to pinpoint the one that I think is most glaring, I would say that it would be a 1A of wide receiver needs to be developed more. Because although I would say, yes, there was a break in development because guys were injured, even if a Deion Colzie's out and a Jaden Thomas is out, you should still be able to take Tobias Merriweather, Rico Flores, Chris Tyree, Jaden Greathouse, and get more production than you've been able to get. I think that that's been a major issue. So I think wide receiver development's number one. I think 1B is the passing attack, I think, is very vanilla. I don't think it's overly creative at all. I think that they are very, like, for whatever reason, they are just a vertically oriented team as far as like boundary receiver in this offense. They're running go routes, they're running comebacks, and they're running hitches. Like, that's basically all they do. And when I look at this team right now, I'm like, you know what? With Deion out, with Tobias not playing his best football, anything that you put into the boundary right now is not incredibly explosive, right? Like Jaden Greathouse is a big body, really nuanced player, but he's not explosive. Rico's a young guy. He'll get more explosive as he gets older, but he's not overly explosive either if you throw him into the boundary. So for me, it's like you need to maximize the skill sets that are there in front of you, right? So why am I seeing Jaden Greathouse being a vertically oriented player when he would be better served with post-snap switches, crossing routes, different things to be able to free people up and to be a little bit more schematically. I don't even want to say exotic because it's not exotic. I just want a little bit of creativity. So I think it's misuse and development of the wide receiver position for me has been probably the biggest inconsistency.
Yeah, I get that. Maybe the counter to that would be it's tough to run exotic routes, option routes, things like that when you're playing a bunch of true freshmen, which is fair. If you have a more experienced group, you could run different route combinations and things like that, where the receiver has to figure out what they're doing on the fly. That's a lot harder to do when you have a bunch of inexperienced guys. And I think that gut.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it. And that's why for me, it's like everybody, and obviously in the media, this isn't the same, but everyone's like, make a change at offensive coordinator, fire the wide receiver coach, Jase Stuckey, like just make changes. And I'm like, I'm not ready to go there yet because like you said, there has been some break in development that is out of their control, right? Like hamstring issues and just a first-year offensive coordinator, calling his plays and a little bit of maybe a conservative offensive approach overall from a philosophy perspective. It wasn't like these wide receivers have been put into the best position this year, I think, to be overly successful. So I'm willing to give Coach Stuckey, if he comes back for a third season, that season to show that he can get development out of those guys and they can take next step. I'm willing to give Jared Parker a second year of let's see what it looks like. I just think that there needs to be a little bit more of reinforcements kind of put into those positions. And ultimately, I think that there needs to be more support put into those positions because right now, I think that's the thing that could hold you back next year because next year you're going to have a redshirt freshman quarterback, maybe a freshman quarterback, maybe a grad transfer, but either way, it's going to be someone new again under center. So you're going to have to figure out to help them make plays and not have to have too much on their back at times.
Yeah, and the guy that Notre Dame currently has under center, let's be honest, did not play really well against Clemson. Now, the fan base, or I shouldn't say the fan base, there is a portion of the fan base that is completely turned on Sam Hartman after the Clemson game. And look, I get it. He sucked. He was flat out terrible against Clemson. He owned it in the press conference afterward. He knows that he didn't play well. But now there's these people who think, oh, he's terrible. He hasn't done anything for Notre Dame all year. I'm like, okay, pump the brakes. Like he played poorly in that game. And I think there's been other times, especially lately, where I think he's been a little bit careless with the ball, and he hasn't been playing as well lately as he did at the start of the season. You watch that Navy game, it almost looks like a different quarterback. So where are you at with the whole Sam Hartman discussion, especially as he enters this game going up against his former team?
I think for me, I think that there have been similar to the wide receiver position. I don't think that the support system around Sam Hartman has been incredibly impressive consistently. And I think because it's really weird, Tyler, right? Like, what did we love about Sam Hartman at Wake Forest? It was that he was a gunslinger, right? Like he wasn't afraid to make a mistake. Like, and that caused him to throw a lot of interceptions at times, but he was never gun shy, right? Like he would always take shots. I mean, I think about A.T. Perry and Donovan Green that he's had, and guys like Jamal Banks that's still on the football team for Wake Forest. I mean, he was taking chances at Wake Forest, and now he seems kind of gun shy to me. And am I to believe, and it's just my opinion, but is it more likely to believe that a sixth-year starting quarterback who had thrown 110 career touchdown passes was top 20 all time in passing yards and passing touchdowns coming into the season is the biggest issue? Am I to believe that when he's been incredibly productive throughout his entire career? I personally don't. Has Sam played poorly in various games? Yes, he has. But why has that happened is the more key question. Why has the regression happened? Why does it now look like Sam Hartman is nothing more than a game manager when at Wake Forest, he was the furthest thing from that. Like they lived and died on Sam Hartman's harm. He lost last year against Clemson in a game where he threw 6 touchdowns and for nearly 400 yards. I mean, he did those things, right? Like he was fearless at times. So I think that it's a combination again. I think the play calling has been suspect at the biggest moments, in my opinion. I think the wide receivers have not been able to help him and bail him out. And I think also during the stretch of wide receiver play and offensive play calling not being the best, I think that he is starting to zero in on certain players, and it's made him less prone to taking chances, right? To put the ball out there. Because to guys like Tobias Merriweather, for instance, he's dropped passes. He's been super inconsistent. That's not where his comfort is. Where Sam Hartman's comfort was throughout the season, for the most part, was Mitchell Evans who's now hurt, unfortunately, and Rico Flores. Those are the two guys that it seemed like he had a little bit of that with Jaden Greathouse early, but then obviously the injury took that away from him. I just think that there's a lack of trust with Sam Hartman right now. That's my biggest thing. I don't think he trusts his surroundings. I don't think he trusts necessarily the plays that are always being called. I think that there's a lack of trust. I don't want to say Notre Dame broke Sam Hartman, but they're certainly not helping Sam Hartman right now. So I just think that there's a lack of trust around this offense right now.
Yep, I totally agree with you. And it's, even though he's played poorly at times, I look at the wide receivers, and more often than not, no one's really getting open. I don't think you can put that all on the quarterback. Okay, I think we covered the offense well enough there. Ryan and I still have more to get to, but I wanted to take this opportunity to tell you about a really exciting new development for us here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Today's episode is also brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a skill-based real money daily fantasy sports game. You've heard me talk about PrizePicks before. I've had so much fun playing it during the football season, and now you could play during basketball season as well. You just select 2 or more players, pick more or less than their projected stats, and place your entry. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, and that's just one of the reasons why I think it's the best daily fantasy game out there. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege, code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Defensively, is there anything about Wake Forest offense that scares you going into this game?
Not really, man. I mean, like historically, right?
I had
like,
to ask, yeah.
I know. I mean, because historically under Warren Ruggiero, like I'm like, oh, cool, man. They got some outside guys, right? Like I mentioned A.T. Perry already, who's just caught a touchdown in the NFL in his first NFL game last week, and Donovan Green, who was a player that NFL circles really liked. I think they had like 4th round Blesto grades on him, preseason NFL grades. So they've had some really good targets offensively. Well, you lost AT, you lost Donovan Green before the season to injury. You have a new starting quarterback in Mitch Griffiths, who also has been banged up throughout a little bit of this season as well. So they've been going
because he does not care at all about his body. That dude just runs around with not a care in the world. Watching him play against Duke was at times hilarious. I respected him for how he played, but at times too, I'm like, has this guy ever played football before? Because he gets some absolute boneheaded plays. But I hope he plays against Notre Dame, honestly, because I think the fans will appreciate watching this game. But I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, man. He's wild. He's a roller coaster. He reminds me a little bit of the Virginia kid, the freshman, the Calandria kid, who's just like, he has some moments where you're like, wow, that's really cool, man. Like that's a really dope and really cool, like just opportunity that he created there. But there's other times where you're like, brother, chill pill, right?
Yeah,
like just
never do that again.
Exactly. So Mitch Griffiths, young quarterback, has been banged up. We have more inexperienced at wide receiver than what they've had in the last couple years. I mean, I still like Jamal Banks at wide receiver. I think he's a talented player. Wesley Grimes has some talent to him. They had a couple little bit of, smaller wide receivers, the Taylor Morans of the world that are like good, solid little football players, right? Like they're not bad players. They're not anything stellar though. And I think the biggest thing, though, is that the run game, because again, I actually kind of like a couple of the running backs they have, but they just haven't been super productive running the football this year. So you just are playing an offense that is struggling, right? And my biggest worry for this team is that Notre Dame comes into this one and not super focused defensively. Because, like, what's the one Achilles heel to Notre Dame's defense this year? They haven't been a great unit at stopping the run consistently. Like they've given up some yards in the run game. And for me, it's like Wake Forest is not a good running team, but they do have some talent at running back. So if this is a game where, let's say, I don't want to bring up Marshall from last year, but it's like, if you take this team for granted, you do a little bit more of a pass game oriented type of approach defensively, and you start just kind of let them extend some drives, right? A play here, a first down here, a chunk play there. Then that's the only time that I'll really get worried. I'm not worried about, and again, I like Jamal Banks, but I'll take the matchup of Cam Hart or Benjamin Morrison on him. I'll live with Jaden Mickey or Christian Gray if they're out there. I think that Notre Dame matches up really well outside with these wide receivers in general. The only thing that worries me slightly is if you let them get the run game going, then that's going to make guys like Jamal Banks and Taylor Morin and Wesley Grimes better football players. But overall, this should be a pretty decisive victory for the Notre Dame defense. But I mean, they have to come and they have to finish, right? Like they have to actualize the talent that they have. And they certainly have the advantage on paper, though. There's no doubt.
I just want to go back to your point when you said that they're solid little football players. That might be the best backhanded compliment I think I've ever heard about a football player. That's like when your crush calls you her little brother. I can't imagine anything more deflating than that. But before we move on, I just wanted to can I get your prediction on the Wake Forest game?
Yeah, it's going to end up, I think we're doing our prediction on Thursday. Actually, tomorrow's Thursday, right? So, yeah. So on Thursday, we'll be doing our prediction at Irish Breakdown. I'm going to have a 34-14. I think that's a pretty tentative score for me. I could see it being more decisive than that, but I have a feeling this is going to be a little bit of an ugly game early on in this contest for some reason. It's just I don't know if it's just me having a little bit of jet lag from what I saw against Clemson and just kind of hoping for a little bit better. But I think 34-14 and a little bit of a uglier game than what that score would necessarily say. And we know one that maybe you had to pull away at the end and kind of went in a slightly decisive fashion. But I think 34-14 is where I'm settling on right now.
Okay, I was going to say 31-10. So
Okay.
in that case, pretty similar. Yeah, I think Notre Dame will win comfortably. I don't think it's ever going to be in doubt, especially in the second half, but I don't think Notre Dame is going to cover that 24.5 point spread. Okay, last thing I wanted to get to before we let you go. It is senior day for Notre Dame. They're honoring 31 different seniors, which is quite a lot. Now, obviously, some of those guys are going to come back. Only 7 of them are exhausting their eligibility, but you do a lot in the NFL draft, so I just wanted to know which Notre Dame seniors, not necessarily underclassmen, did the most to improve their draft stock heading into 2024?
Well, that's a very interesting question because I think the best answer are a couple guys that could potentially return, but are technically graduated seniors, right? And so I think that, I mean, the easy answer is Xavier Watts, who came into the year. Obviously, we know the backstory. Wide receiver turned rover, turned back to safety, wide receiver a little bit in a weird kind of situation where he's going both ways. And he showed a lot in the end of 2022 that got you excited. And then obviously he has showed after a little bit of a slower start this year that he's one of the best ball hawks in college football. I mean, he's got great instincts. He's really talented. He obviously has a wide receiver background. You could see that based upon the 7 interceptions and all the plays he's made in the passing game. I think, although he has another year, there is going to be a very interesting decision for Xavier Watts after this season because he is a graduated player already. He graduated in 3.5 years. It doesn't really matter as much from the All-Star circuit because the Senior Bowl and East West Shrine Game can now take underclassmen, so it doesn't matter as much. But I wouldn't be shocked if he's a guy that Jim Nagy, Eric Galco, those guys are talking to about, potentially coming to their game, declaring early, because I think even Mel Kiper may have had him as their number 6 overall safety in the 2024 NFL draft if he chooses to declare. So I think he's the easy answer. The other one is Howard Cross, who, look, man, Howard Cross is going to be an outlier at the next level. I mean, he is going to be 6 foot, 280 pounds, playing nose tackle at Notre Dame. It doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense that he's been as productive as he is, especially this year. The kid just makes plays, man. And he's an Energizer bunny. I don't think that he's ever going to be more than a early to mid day 3 football player. I just don't think he's going to go, day 2. I don't think he's a 2nd or 3rd round guy. I just don't think it's ever going to happen. But you look at him and say, NFL bloodlines, productivity, motor never turns off. That guy's going to play, right? He's going to at least get a chance to play in the NFL. So I think those 2 guys are the biggest risers for sure. We already knew about Joe Alt. We knew Audric Estime with a full workload was going to be a really good football player. We know who Cam Hart is. Cam Hart's thing is just going to be about the medicals, right? Do those shoulders check out, that type of stuff. But I think that Xavier Watts will have a very interesting decision, as will Howard Cross, because he's another guy that could take a 6th year if he wanted to, but will he want to with the draft buzz that he's getting? I mean, Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl has been tweeting about him several times this season. So I think that he has the potential to jump as well, but we'll see obviously over the next few weeks.
Personally, I would be stunned if Howard Cross decided to come back. I just don't think there's that much he can do to improve his draft stock. Like the same things they're going to fault him in this draft are going to probably fault him next year, just related to his size. Xavier Watts, I really hope he comes back. But you're right. I actually just looked it up to confirm because I was surprised that he was so high in Mel Kiper's list of safeties. I'm seeing him as high as 7. So all of a sudden, I'm like, man, maybe he's not going to come back. So yes or no? Do you think he's going to stay or go?
I think he will, because I do think that the one pushback from the NFL is that they want to see multi-years of big-time production, right? Because 1 year wonders.
He hasn't been playing long.
Exactly.
He hasn't been playing the safety position long, I should say.
Yeah, and 1 year wonders are always a big negative from an NFL draft space. Like I know a lot of scouts, I know a lot of evaluators and this usually goes to the quarterback position more than anything, but experience does matter, right? Like it does. It really does, especially making that quick transition to the next level. So the craziest part about Xavier Watts, in my opinion, is that I don't think we've seen nearly the best football that he could play. And we're sitting here with him having 7 interceptions on the season and leading college football in that category, right? So I think potentially going back for another year would be beneficial for him from an experience factor. So I will say that I think he probably is more come back than leave, but I wouldn't be shocked either way.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's like a prime example of a player that you could convince to stay because of an NIL raise, because he's sort of that fringe, later round draft pick who could probably make the same amount of money if he were to come back and play in college. Okay, we kept you a little bit long. Ryan, before we let you go, please take this opportunity to let the people know where they can find you, because I know you've got a ton of different stuff going on, so feel free to plug it on the way out.
Nah, man, I really appreciate it. So, I mean, from the Notre Dame perspective, you can go to irishbreakdown.com. We also have the Irish Breakdown podcast every single day that we stream. And, I cover the recruiting side of things. That's the main job. But we also cover, obviously, team intel, recruiting intel, boards at irishbreakdown.com. We try to give as many people as much insight into the program as we possibly can. So irishbreakdown.com. If you're just general into NFL draft evaluations or just talking ball, you can follow me on Twitter at Rise and Draft, like Shake and Bake, Rise and Draft, and talk ball, man. I do consulting for RPM data. I run my own website, riseanddraft.com. So there's a lot of NFL draft takes, but I know obviously it's the Notre Dame channel, so make sure to go to irishbreakdown.com.
Hey, you clearly are a very busy guy, so I really appreciate the time, man, and we'll do it again soon.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Remember to get your mailbag questions in if you want to be featured on Friday's show. You can send them in on Twitter at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod, or you can drop them below in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. By the way, if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't liked this video yet or subscribed to the channel, please do so now. And if you're listening to the podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe. Same time, same place tomorrow, guys. See you then.